Hello Mila, hello Jack, hello everybody else who's watching, and welcome to Storytime with Grandad. Today's book is from the Lighthouse Keeper, and it is The Lighthouse Keeper's Tea. Mr. and Mrs. Grinling lived with their cat Hamish and his family in a little white house perched high on the cliff. Some days Mr. Grinling was the lighthouse keeper, but other days he just got in Mrs. Grinling's way. Mr. G, you're always under my feet," complained Mrs. Grinling. Mr. Grinling sighed. "I'm bored, Mrs. G. Now that Sam helps out at the lighthouse, I haven't got enough to do." "A new pastime," said Mrs. Grinling. "That's what you need. What do you enjoy doing?" "Eating," suggested Mr. Grinling. He dipped his finger in the icing. "That's it," he said. "The perfect pastime. If I like eating, I'm sure I'd like cooking." Mrs. Grinling looked alarmed. "Perhaps I could help?" "No, thank you," said Mr. Grinling. "I can do it myself. You have a little rest while I make some bread for our lunch. Just pop in these ingredients, mix them about a bit, and hey presto, the bread will be ready in no time." The bread rose and rose and flopped. When Mr. Grinling tried to put it in the oven, the dough slithered everywhere. "I don't like cooking," he decided. "Much too messy." "Oh dear, such a pity," said Mrs. Grinling. "Perhaps something outdoors would suit you better. What about bird watching with your telescope?" "Good idea, Mrs. G," agreed Mr. Grinling. "I could keep an eye on those pesky seagulls." So he packed a little something and set out. "Here's your warm jumper," Mrs. Grinling called after him. "No, thank you," replied Mr. Grinling. "It's a beautiful day. Look at that sun." He didn't see any seagulls, but he did spy 5 greenfinches, 4 missel thrushes, 3 mallard ducks, 2 black swans, and a kingfisher on the riverbank. "I'm enjoying this," thought Mr. Grinling. "A nice change from seagulls." It was during lunch that he remembered that he didn't like cows. "Shoo!" he said bravely. "Moo!" mooed the gentle cows. Mr. Grinling scrambled up the tree while the cows finished his cheese, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches. He rang Sam. "Help, help! I'm sure I've just seen a dangerous wild boar." Sam was surprised. "A wild boar? Ferocious," said Mr. Grinling. "And I'm very cold. Please rescue me." "Where are you?" asked Sam. "Well," explained Mr. Grinling, "I'm up a very thin tree in a field surrounded by a green hedge and a few cows." It took Sam several hours to find him. "No more bird watching," said Mr. Grinling. "Far too dangerous. With all those wild cows," said Sam, helpfully. But Mr. Grinling was still bored. "Oh dear," he thought, "there must be something I enjoy." He tried the violin, but that was too screechy for everyone. He went out with his kite, but that was too windy. And then there was the rollerblading, but that was an absolute disaster. "Perhaps old dogs can't learn new tricks," teased Mrs. Grinling. "Old?" spluttered Mr. Grinling. "Did you say old? Sea dogs like me are never too old to learn new tricks. I just haven't found the perfect one yet." Said Mrs. Grinling. One morning in Wild Horses Bay, Mr. Grinling met Sam carrying a large board. He was surprised. "I didn't know you were a surfer, Sam." "One of the best," boasted Sam, and he rode the big waves while Mr. Grinling watched. "I wish I could do that," said Mr. Grinling. "Come and have a go," said Sam. he pulled Mr. Grinling onto the surfboard. "There might be a bit of a problem," Mr. Grinling tried to explain, but Sam didn't hear him. Mr. Grinling stood up on the surfboard, and he fell off the surfboard. "Swim!" shouted Sam. "Glug, glug," glugged Mr. Grinling. "I can't," he spluttered. "That's the bit of a problem." "Aha," Sam shook his head. "If you want to be a surfer, that's not a bit of a problem. That's an enormous problem." "I'm an extremely good floater," said Mr. Grinling hopefully. Sam was firm. If you can't swim, you can't be a surfer. But Mr. Grinling had made up his mind. Surfing was what he wanted to do most in the world. "Don't breathe a word to Mrs. G," said Mr. Grinling. "She thinks old dogs can't learn new tricks. I'll show her this one can." "Shall I help you with the swimming?" asked Sam. "No, thank you," said Mr. Grinling. "I know exactly what to do." He found a rock in just the right place and lowered himself into the water. "I splash with my arms like this, and kick with my feet like this, and then I do both together." "Glug, glug," glugged Mr. Grinling as he splashed wildly. "Help, help," cried Mr. Grinling. "I'm drowning." "Luckily, I'm a good floater," remembered Mr. Grinling, turning over. He floated around the old jetty and through the Needles. He floated beside the white sand beach and over the wreck of the Hesperus. He floated across the channel, rippling with irritable little waves. He floated past the lighthouse and the little white house. At last he floated up onto the beach. "Perhaps I do need a little bit of help," he whispered to Hamish as he crept to bed. "Join today," said the notice at the Green Lagoon pool. "I've come to learn to swim," said Mr. Grinling. "We've got just the class for you," replied the swimming instructor. "First, we'll try the kicking." Glug, glug, glugged Mr. Grinling, and he sank to the bottom of the pool. "Now we'll use our arms," called the instructor. Splash, splash, splashed Mr. Grinling, but still he sank. The children watched. "We'll help you, Mr. Grinling," they said, and they did. Soon he could do dog paddle, freestyle, backstroke, and butterfly. "Congratulations," said the swimming instructor. "I always say you're never too old to learn." "Well done," exclaimed Sam. "Now I'll show you how to surf." "No, thank you," said Mr. Grinling. "I'll do it myself." "Stubborn old sea dog," said Sam quietly. Mr. Grinling bought a bright yellow wetsuit and a tiny red surfboard. Every day he practiced where he thought no one could see him, and every day he fell into the water hundreds of times. 1001 muttered Mr. Grinling as he scrambled onto the board again. "This time I'll do it," he called to the seagulls. "I think he needs a helping hand," said Sam to the children. "Are you ready for action?" 7 shark fins rose in the water. "Blither my whiskers!" shouted Mr. Grinling. 7 sharks surfed beside him. Mr. Grinling stayed on the surfboard all the way to the shallows. 7 sharks climbed out of the water. "Well," cried Sam, "our shark trick certainly helped an old sea dog learn a new trick." "You frightened the life out of me," said Mr. Grinling, but a grin stretched right across his face. It wasn't long before Mr. Grinling could ride the waves just like a real surfer. "Now I can show Mrs. Grinling," he announced. "Not yet, not yet," begged the children. "We've thought of the perfect occasion." On the day of the Wild Horse Bay Sea Carnival, Mrs. Grinling searched high and low for Mr. Grinling. "I don't understand. He always enters the sandcastle competition and runs in the sack race. Whatever's happened to him? Wherever can he be?" she asked the children. "Don't worry," they said, and they arranged a deck chair for her. "So you can get a better view of the surfing," they explained. And they all lined up on the water's edge, and the big wave rose up across the bay. The drums began to roll. Mrs. Grinling watched the little round figure on the surfboard. The figure in yellow surfed almost to her feet. He peeled off his wetsuit and bowed. "I'd like you to meet an old sea dog," he said. Mrs. Grinling was speechless. She gave Mr. Grinling a great big hug. "I did it all by myself," he said proudly, "with a little help from Sam and the children." "In that case," said Mrs. Grinling, "I think we should have a splendiferous surfing tea." "We'll help if you like," said the children. And they did. The end. Goodbye, Mila. Goodbye, Jack. I'll see you soon. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.